I don't know about you, but I've been pretty excited to get back into our study of the Gospel of Mark. I mean, I'm surprised that, not more people are here because we're talking about this. But then, I went to look at the passage this week, and I was like, oh my goodness. In the Bible, there are tough passages to interpret, and there are weird passages to interpret, and this one is tough and weird. We have exorcism, we have demons, we have pigs flying off the cliffs and drowning in the water, we have somebody begging to be a disciple and follower of Jesus, and he says, no, stay there and tell your story there. So for me, a lot of it has to do with context, and context is important because if you remember, at the end of Mark, we finished up with a story about Jesus calming the storm with just be quiet, be still, and everything just went quiet. And so we have this story. Jesus is confronting a man and has a similar, and this man might have a storm within himself. But where they find themselves is important. And our passage says it's the region of Gerasenes. Now, there's 3 or 4 different manuscripts, and each one has a different name for what this town is. And there's a bunch of debate. I'm not going to fill you in on all the details, but there's a debate saying, what is this town? Geological studies point out and have revealed that there was this small town on the northeast coast of the Sea of Galilee. All the other towns were inland about 38 miles. So they don't think it was this one. They think it was this town that they found called Gerasa. And it's right on the northeast corner. And wouldn't you know, right out of town, there are these bluffs, these high bluffs that fall down into the water below. But what's important about it is this region was not part of Israel, was not part of the Jewish region. It was a Gentile territory, and it had been conquered years before Jesus come by the Roman Empire. So at the end of the passage, you get a little hint of the Decapolis. Those are 10 cities that have been established by the Roman Empire to sort of be the poster child of cities about what it looks like when the Roman Empire and its culture and its civilization comes to town and how wonderful it is. And so this is where it's all happening. So first of all, it's Gentile, unclean. Now it's ruled by unclean pagan rulers who are worshiping other gods and forcing their culture on us, unclean. And last, the other part of it is, it's happening in a graveyard. And for the Jewish people, if you get close to dead people in tombs too long, it becomes unclean. It's a no-no. You don't want to be there. And so, again, unclean. And on top of it all, the man has an unclean spirit residing in him. This guy is dirtier than Pigpen in the Peanuts cartoons. That's what Mark wants you to see. But he goes on from that a little bit more. He goes on and says, this man was changed, but there are no chains and no person strong enough to contain this man. He is an abysmal representation of a human being. His life has lost its purpose, its meaning. He no longer bears the image of God. He has completely disconnected from any sort of life that God wants for him. He's living apart from it. He's been completely shaped and transformed by evil within him. Just like the storm that ravaged the boat, this man has been ravaged by evil. And then he sees Jesus. And what does he do? He runs towards him. Now, Jesus just gotten out of the boat. He can handle the storm. How's he going to handle this guy? I got me thinking is that there was a guy here in my 5 years that he would camp outside every once in a while and he'd try to live on our property. And he was a big guy. And this man was very polite and very kind and very strong. And there were times when this man just would flip on a dime. Like all of a sudden he'd be fine, be nice and smiling, and then he'd get angry and upset and dangerous and threatening and violent. And he had a history of being violent throughout Golden. And so I always thought, like, what if this guy, when I tell him, you can't sleep on our property, you have to go find some other place, what if he turns on me? And what if he runs towards me? Now, my imagination is, I know what I'm going to do to that guy. I have my ideas. I'm going to punch him. I'm going to kick him. And so this guy's running towards Jesus. And you think that, Jesus at this point is like, what am I going to do, Well, Jesus is the Son of God. So he's got a little bit more stuff, ammunition in his, pockets. He's got a little more. But what happens is the guy just falls down and begins onto his knees in front of Jesus, which is an act of worship, an act of honoring Jesus. And he says, Son of Man, Son of God. He knows who Jesus is. Now, throughout Mark, one of the big questions is, who is this Jesus? And everyone else is trying to figure it out. They're like, who is he? Is he the Messiah? What's he doing? Is he a heretic? Is he a blaspheme? And what's amazing is that evil knows who Jesus is. You're the Son of God. Don't torture me, he says. Take it easy on me. And Jesus just says, listen, what's your name? What's your name? Because he knows there's an impure spirit. My name is Legion, which is there's many demons in him. But it could also be this. That if he's living in a land where they're occupied by the Roman army, there's a legion there. There are forces there that we call the legion of the Roman Empire. And so to me, that's no coincidence. And many people point this out, that what's happening is that this man has been completely influenced and oppressed by this oppressive force of the Roman army, who they proclaim that they're bringing progress and good news to all the people, but then they tax you and they oppress you. And if you get out of line and you're disruptive anyway, they crucify you. And so there's this evil around this guy that is now within him and has possessed him to the point where he's no longer looking like a human being. He is completely abysmal. He's wailing out and crying out, and he's cutting on himself. He's lost touch with reality. And here's Jesus, who lives to a deeper connected reality of the Father and the Spirit, of that very life of heaven coming into the presence. That's the life Jesus knows and lives and is part of. And he stands before him and says, you got to get out. You're no longer allowed to live in this man. And they begin to negotiate. They're like, hey, listen, could we just get in the pigs instead? That's weird, right? First of all, we don't know what to do with demons. We don't know what to do with exorcism. But then they go into the pigs, and the pigs start hightailing it. They know those, to the cliffs, and they jump off, and they drown. And you're like, why in the world what does this make sense? I think the only thing I can connect it to is the story of Exodus, when, the Israelites are fleeing from the Egyptian army, and they're being chased by chariots. And what happens to those chariots? And the water falls on them, and they drown. And so, I don't know, it sounds something like that Jesus is liberating and stronger than the powers of the empire, of the Roman Empire, that have been shaping this guy, and that's part of the evil. And that's the best I can make sense of it. And I forgot to tell you at the beginning, you will have more questions than answers by the time I'm done this morning. So the people who see all this happening, they get bugged out. And I can't decide whether they're bugged out because they're like, you just killed our herd. You just took away my income for the year, and they're mad about that. And they're like, listen, we have to take these pigs and sell them to the Roman Empire, and you just set them all off on the cliff. What are we going to do? So that could be one. But I just think if you were to see that whole scene, this guy, and Jesus comes up to him, and he casts it out, and you're like, what just happened? And those pigs just ran off the side of the cliff and drowned. That is, could you imagine seeing that scene in real life? You would just wig out. And I would run and go in and tell everybody too. I'd be like, this guy just did something pretty darn weird and amazing. And but they were also afraid. You would think, well, first of all, let me say this. They go and they get people, they come back, and here's the man. And this is one of the key points of the story. And the man is dressed. I guess he wasn't dressed. He's got clothes on. He's sitting there. He's calm. And he's in good mind. Just like the storm was calm, this man is now calm. He's back, fully restored. And the people see that, and they're afraid. Why would you be afraid of that? I think you would rejoice. Holy smokes, look, this guy was a madman, completely ravaged by evil. Now he's a human being again. Let's rejoice. But they're afraid. And throughout the book of Mark and throughout the entirety of the Bible is when the power of God's manifests and you see things like this, the response is you don't know what to make, you're bewildered by. You don't know how to make sense of it. You become afraid by the power of God to transform in your midst, which to me feels strange. And I don't have a lot in my life where I can be like, I was afraid because I saw this amazing thing of God in the world. But there's something about that, and when you come face to face with the power of God to transform fear. Jesus has connected this disconnected soul back to the reality of the inbreaking rule of heaven, and he's been transformed by it. And his life is going to be completely different. Now, this man has had a life under the oppressive yoke of the Roman Empire, which is evil. His whole being has been misplaced by this evil. He's surrounded, like I said, by it. It's taken up residence in him. And so the question is, in our lives, as followers of Jesus, how much attention do we give to the evil in this world? What's the balance? We don't want to ignore it. We can't turn away from it. We can't just simply say it's not there and hide away in our own little bubbles. We have to live in a world that's full of evil. Don't we? I mean, we don't have a choice, actually. It's all around us. We see it everywhere. We see it in human trafficking. We see it in the politics of the day that conjure up fear that the other person is going to overcome us or do terrible things, and so we have to hate the other. We feel that pulling us apart. We see it in the wars and the violence and the death of innocent people. We see it in all sorts of ways, don't we? So what do we do with that? How do we live with that? How do we be apprentices in this context? And I think Jesus is pointing us to something in this passage. Do you remember the Dementors in the Harry Potter novel? Anybody not remember? So, Dementors are amongst the darkest creatures in the wizarding world. Here's a picture of them. J.K. Rowling, the author, she designed them to represent despair and emotional emptiness and soul-draining evil. Dementors are these hooded, wraith-like creatures that feed on human happiness. They glide through the air, clothed in darkness, and wherever they appear, warmth disappears, hope fades, people relive their worst memories. Despair is where they leave you in. And they were originally used by the wizarding government to guard the prison of Azkaban because their presence alone keeps prisoners in total despair, which might be the ultimate bondage. Dementors feed upon anything positive within us. When they are near, happiness, joy drains away, gone. People feel crushing depression and powerlessness, their worst memories. The longer the stay, the more the people feel empty, lonely, hopeless, and numb. And their most terrifying act is called the Dementor's kiss. When a Dementor presses its mouth into a person's face, it sucks out the person's soul, leaving them glowing, just leaving them completely in a state of darkness and death. A fate worse than death, really. And this is interesting to me, as how are they fought? The Patronus charm. And the Patronus charm, they are taught, is that you remember a good memory, something beautiful and good and loving in your life, and you imagine that and you push that out towards the Dementor so it protects you and it forces them to leave. And I think that's amazing, because we don't have to use magic. Jesus comes into this situation. Here is this guy who's been completely have the life sucked out of him. And Jesus, by his power, says, be gone. Jesus is the Patronus charm. And so what I find interesting next about this passage is this guy, once he's completely restored, he begs Jesus. He's begging him to let me come with you. Let me come with you. And Jesus says, no, I want you to stay. I want you to stay amongst the oppressive rule. Go to the Decapolis, go where you came from, and tell them your story. Tell them what God has done in you and the mercy that he has shown you. See, that's like Jesus is saying, go be a Patronus charm amongst this culture that wants to oppress you. They think they have the story, and Mark is always comparing. Here's what the story of life looks like in the world and is being told here. But here's the story of the inbreaking reality that I want you to be part of and shaped by. See, when we allow ourselves to be shaped by the evil around us and we spend too much focus on it and it begins to shape our hearts, it leaves us in a state of lostness and despair and confusion and anger and joylessness. But when we instead seek first the kingdom of God and God's righteousness, and we participate in what God's doing to Easter amongst us, then we begin to tell a different story, not with just our mouths, but with our lives. And we begin to say to that evil, you don't have place in my life. You don't have place in this world. It's Spirituality 101 starts with mountain biking 101. If you've ever been a mountain biker and you're tearing down a path and you see an obstacle in front of you and you're staring at that, most likely you're going to hit that obstacle. But if you're looking at the path around it, you're going to go right around it. So if our focus is evil, we're going to hit it and it's going to have its way of shaping our hearts and minds and leave us in despair. Or we go around it and we keep our eye on Jesus and what he's doing and the way that Easter's happening in this world, then that's where we move to. And so that's basically, essentially, as apprentices, what are we doing? Where is our hearts? How is our heart? How is evil having its way in us? The truth of the matter is in that quote from C.S. Lewis at the top of your bulletin, is that no, I don't think I quoted that one. I think it's something else. I think it might have been Solzhenitsyn who said that in our hearts, don't look at your bulletins because I quoted it wrong. Solzhenitsyn talked about we don't have to look out there to find evil because the reality of it is that there's both evil and good happening right here in us, in our hearts. And so are we paying attention to that? Are we aware of that? And are we allowing the story of Jesus to be the main operating story that shapes our hearts? I heard this cool story because, maybe before that, Jesus tells him to stay in that place and tell his story. Well, I heard this cool story this week of this woman. She was visiting somewhere in Colombia, and she was there, I don't know, for business or mission or what, but she saw this little girl kind of sneaking around, looking around, and then she ran and darted towards this sewer. And then she climbed down into the sewer, and she was gone. And so this lady was so intrigued by this, she went and bought a wetsuit. And then she went down at that same sewer looking to see what was going on. And she found hundreds of other little kids down there. And then she began to investigate. She's like, what's going on down here? Why are you down here? What's happening? And it turns out that the police that were in that town were killing these kids because they were disposables. They were just unnecessary things that were just making things bad in that land. And so they were killing these children. And so this woman said, no way, this is not going to happen. So she started talking with different officials, different people, different groups, different churches, and she created a whole system where these kids were being adopted and brought into other homes of people in different churches. She was saying, no, I believe in an Easter God, and I'm going to act in such a way, and I'm going to tell that story. And when you act that way and you live that way, it's amazing. People are amazed by it. We saw that video today. I mean, like Deb said, like you might just think of it like, yeah, what's the big deal? Like that happens all the time. But for these kids, some of them are never going to see, that's the most they've ever seen of the world outside of their little village. I mean, I see the faces of some of those kids, and I know them. And they haven't seen much more than the goodness of the Shalom compound. But they used to live in darkness. They used to live in darkness. And now they're out. They have community, and they're smiling, and they're celebrating, and they're loving. And what I think Love with Actions keeps doing is ministering to our hearts and reminding us that, yes, there's evil in this world. Yes, it gets to the point where there's genocide. Yes, it's wicked. But are we going to live in despair and allow the dementors to get us? Or are we going to say, here's the story of Easter happening, and I'm going to participate in that story? In my everyday going about life, in my work, everywhere I go, allow that story to shape me and inform me in such a way that I tell what God has done in my life. So friends, what has God done in your life for you? What has God done in your life for you? Why is your life different than it used to be? Where's there Easter happening in you? And tell people about that. And tell the mercy of God. I was once lost and now I'm found. I still have buddies of mine who are like, I cannot believe you're a pastor. I didn't ever think there was a day when you would get up there and proclaim the love of God in Jesus. Because my life wasn't at a point. There was points in my life. There was no way anybody would ever imagine I'd be up here. But I can say God is so good. And God has taken me and reminded me who I am. He's taken my identity. He's broken chains. He's liberated me. I know what it means to be clothed and dressed and calm and at peace because of the new life of heaven breaking in. And I know you do too. And so, friends, our job is to go into this world and tell the story of that and how the mercy's gone and to find ways to participate with God where God is Eastering and bringing new life into this world. Amen.